Wow, here we are, 5 years already. It's been insane to think that it's been 5 years since Resident Evil 7 came out. But, here we are. And this game, a lot of people were saying this game saved Resident Evil. And I would agree. I think it was definitely going down a path that wasn't Resident Evil that we knew anymore. And to kind of step away from that and go, okay, we need to rethink what we're doing. With Resident Evil 7, it was just the right move to do. So today we're going to go over what Resident Evil 7 is, the impact it had on the series and horror in general, because this game really is not one to miss. Like, if you haven't played Resident Evil 7 already, definitely do so. All this footage is very early on in the game, so nothing too heavily spoilery, but I will mention spoilers throughout the video, so just keep that in mind. Without any further ado, let's get into and celebrate the 5th anniversary of Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. So first, let's go back a little bit. Resident Evil 5 and 6 had already released, and honestly, they sold well. I think Capcom did see them as a success, and more power to them. The games are genuinely fun to play, if not a little different from the usual formula. Now, Resident Evil 4 is what started the shift. Resident Evil 4 was, I believe, a perfect blend of horror and action, and instead of keeping to that kind of trend, they decided to go more towards the action kind of genre at the time. But, eventually it did get to a point where the series was having a bit of an identity crisis, like it didn't really feel like Resident Evil anymore. While the game was still fun, do not get me wrong, Resident Evil 6 is a genuinely fun game, but I personally wouldn't consider it a proper Resident Evil game. But yeah, they did go off the rails a little bit with the whole action, set pieces. It was very cinematic, very kind of over the top, and a lot of people did say, Resident Evil 6 is a good game, it is fun, but what is this game? Like, what is it supposed to be? And that did kind of lead to it having a mixed opinions on its release, and Capcom then decided to kind of take a step back and rethink their kind of methods with Resident Evil. So the general idea was to take the series back to where it was at the very beginning. I'm not just talking about Resident Evil. If you do not know, Resident Evil is actually inspired by an early Capcom game called Sweet Home. That was very early in Capcom's kind of early days, and Resident Evil was originally going to be the sequel to that game, but instead they decided to kind of go at it from a different direction, different perspective, different gameplay, story, and it became its own thing. And people loved the first game. The first game is very kind of, it's very condensed to a single location with a limited cast, which again works perfectly. And the horror was good in the first game, especially when it first came out. Like, it was something different. A lot of people didn't really play this type of game before, and it really has set the example for what horror games should be over the years. So with all that in mind, Capcom had decided that the best place to go with Resident Evil was to take it back to how it all started: a limited cast, limited location, and that brings us to the general idea of Resident Evil 7. So RE7 is set in Louisiana in the south of America, and they picked that location mainly because it's very out there. The town that the game is saying is called Dolby, but that is a fictional place. It doesn't exist. But where you are in the game itself is very isolated. It kind of adds that sense of, if you're in trouble out there, no one's coming anytime soon to get you. And then, of course, you're inside the Baker estate, which is very, very reminiscent to the Spencer Mansion in RE1. Obviously, the kind of the backstory of the Baker estate is that it was actually built by the same guy who built the Spencer Mansion, sorry. So, the similarities are there. It definitely has the same kind of layout, same kind of feel, mysterious rooms, secret areas. They all do very much belong in the Baker estate. On top of that, we have the Bakers themselves: Jack, Marguerite, Zoe, and Lucas. Originally, there was going to be more of them, but now, again, with a limited cast, you have 4 main inhabitants of the Baker estate, as well as, Mia and Ethan, and that's basically it throughout the entire game. That's only really 6 people, which, again, very reminiscent to the first game, very limited cast. And of course, the biggest change with RE7 is the perspective. Now, originally, if you didn't know, Resident Evil was always going to be a first person. It was going to kind of follow in the footsteps of games like Doom, which were kind of like the real big introductory points to the first person perspective in games. But due to limitations and stuff like that, they decided to go for the fixed camera with the 2D rendered images as the backgrounds, and again, I'm very glad they did that. Supposedly, they got the inspiration for this by playing a game called Alone in the Dark, very old game now, but still very good. and they kind of based it loosely around that in terms of a perspective and gameplay standpoint. But yeah, first person really does add to the horror, you know, it puts you in the eyes of the character, and that's what's so good about Ethan Winters in Resident Evil 7. You do not know who this guy is. He's not a soldier, he's not some superhero Chris Redfield, you know, he's just a dude looking for his wife, and that really really puts things into perspective while you play the game. You know, you have no military training, you are not kind of expecting anything bad, but as soon as you get there and things aren't going right, and he's just a guy, yeah, he's in trouble. Now, Ethan Winters is definitely a character that's definitely improved since the very beginning of RE7. There was a lot of criticism around Ethan in RE7 because he had really not much personality, he didn't really say much, didn't really know anything about him, and I personally think that was a good thing. Now, Capcom had already said prior to Resident Evil 7's launch, I believe, that they wanted the player to basically think they were Ethan Winters, you know, to be in his shoes and see things through his eyes, you know, not some kind of super soldier Chris Redfield, you know, who's experienced way more than what anyone else has. You know, this is a new character, this is someone who's been thrown into the fray unexpectedly, and you have to kind of see what happens through their eyes and how they experience it. Okay, so let's talk about the horror now, shall we? Now, Resident Evil 7 is very heavy on a lot of horror element. In fact, recently, maybe not so much anymore, but about 6-7 months ago, this was after Resident Evil Village came out, there was an article about RE7 and how people found it too scary. Personally, I would say Resident Evil 7 wasn't all that scary. There was a couple jump scares that I think got me on the first time through. For example, there's one that happens on the boat that got me. It's very, very unexpected. It's basically the one where Mia's looking at the CCTV to find Ethan, she finds him, and as soon as you turn, Evelyn jumps up. That got me. And then there was one in the greenhouse with Marguerite. You approach the crow door and she jumps around the corner. That got me, but that's about it, I think, for that game. But I think the horror for RE7 is more the fact of where you are and what's going on. Again, like I mentioned, you're just playing a guy who, you know, is really in and over his head right now. On top of that, you're in the middle of nowhere. You're literally in a swamp in the Louisiana, which is pretty barren anyway. So you really are very far away from everyone. And the only police officer you've seen that could maybe have helped you has been killed basically immediately. On top of that, you know, there's eerie lighting, you know, you're very restricted to what you can see, because in first person perspective, you can't exactly see like around the corner or behind you a little bit. You are very much dealing with what's in front of you at the time. You know, even as far as the kind of general kind of just ambience of the game is pretty creepy. Like, it genuinely does keep you on edge, especially the first time through. On top of that, this game did have full VR support, which definitely did add a sense of a lot more horror to it, because obviously you're the one looking around now, physically. I've seen plenty of reaction videos of people playing the game in VR and just being genuinely terrified. Unfortunately, I never got the opportunity to play it. I would always love to, so maybe when the VR 2 comes out for PlayStation, maybe that'll work. Who knows? But, you know, the game is genuinely probably one of the more scary in the series, but I don't think it's too scary, personally. Next we'll move on to gameplay. Gameplay really did take it back to how it was originally. You have very limited weapon variation. I believe there's 2 handguns, a couple of shotguns, a grenade launcher, a flamethrower, and a magnum in this game, alongside the knife, and a couple of bonus weapons of course. But in terms of general kind of weapon use, you have 2 pistols, 2 shotguns, a grenade launcher, a burner, and a magnum. Very, very reminiscent to the original games, especially 1 and 2. Again, you know, you're usually using 1 pistol, 1 shotgun, and then an extra weapon like a magnum. And, you know, again, you don't get a lot of ammo in these games. That's kind of the idea, you know, you have to save bullets, you have to make sure you're using them when you need to, not just randomly spraying. On top of that, the return of the item box and the limited inventory. Now, I personally really like that system compared to everything else in Resident Evil in terms of a gameplay system. I think the attached case system in RE4 and Village is really good as well. But I always preferred the limited inventory space and the item box management. I think that just adds a whole new depth of, you know, paying attention to the game and what's going on, more so than just kind of having unlimited space except for ammo and stuff. Again, that's down to preference, but I just kind of prefer the original system. And of course, the return of combining items to make better things, you know, i.e., you know, gunpowder and chem fluid, you know, herbs and chem fluid to make first aid. You know, there's a lot of that going on in this game again, which again is a really, I said again like 5 times, but yeah, it's a good system. it does encourage you to kind of search around and look for things that may be of use. And again, it's just good. I like it. Now then, Resident Evil 7 also has a lot of inspiration from other places as well, and I'm sure many of you know what these inspirations are, very much so in the theme of the horror movie genre. To throw a couple of things out there, just a few examples off the top of my head. Evil Dead is very present in this game. There is literally so many references to those films. Ethan's car is Ash's car in the original movie. Even Jack says groovy in the chainsaw fight, which is Ash, the main character from Evil Dead. It's basically his kind of catchphrase. And, you know, other movies do exist in the game as well. I believe Lucas's area is very much influenced off of Saw. The whole kind of playing a game that either means life or death is very kind of the theme of the Saw movies. Location itself, it is very much giving the vibe of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, just the general location, the look of the place. Originally, the Baker estate was actually going to be a farm house type thing. Obviously, it is kind of reminiscent to a farm, but it was going to be a lot more involved in, you know, an actual farm, like a big barn in it and everything, but they changed it. But again, the Texas Chainsaw references are all definitely still there. And then slightly, this is a smaller kind of movie franchise, but VHS as well. There's a lot of videotapes in this game that kind of portray people dying or things happening to them that aren't necessarily the best thing. And again, that does kind of draw a lot of references from that as well and inspiration from that. So clearly the game is very inspired by a lot of popular horror, you know, icons. As well as movies as well, of course, you know, all great movies. If you've seen any of those films, do let me know if you enjoy them, because I really do. Okay, so overall story of Resident Evil 7, I'll try and keep it as simple as possible to avoid any spoilers. I'd imagine most people watching this video have seen it, but just in case, I do want to kind of basically explain what's going on. So essentially, Mia Winters, Ethan's wife, had gone away for work and had disappeared for 3 years. And then suddenly, out of the blue, Ethan gets a letter or an email, one of the two things, basically saying, you know, it's her. She's safe. She tells him where she is and basically says, come and get me. So away he goes to Louisiana to go and find his wife. I personally would see that as a bit of a red flag. You know, it's been 3 years and you have literally received an email. It could be anyone, like maybe they just found a computer or something like that, you know, or take someone with you, you know, at least. But video games, everyone, they don't have to make sense. But anyway, he goes to Louisiana, finds the house, finds Mia, but all is not what it seems. She's acting a bit crazy, everyone, you know? Trying to kill him randomly and then going back to normal, and it doesn't make a lot of sense. And then eventually, she cuts off his damn hand, which is, you know, a bit of a interesting reunion, to say the least. But anyway, they tussle, he beats her, and then gets caught by Jack, who takes him to the rest of the family, and then things go from there. To kind of expand a bit on the story without spoiling too much, there is a bioweapon living in the house called Evelyn. She basically turns people into horrific mold monsters if they're like not exactly nice to her. Like her idea is that she wants a family of her own because she's basically a test subject to bioweapon and hasn't really had a family, and she's basically kind of forced the Bakers into being her family. She's given them her gift, which is basically, you know, their regenerative powers and their weird extra little additions of their abilities that they can do. You know, Marguerite can try to control bugs, and Jack's super strong and can regenerate really easily. Lucas, we're not 100% sure, but he does turn into something in the DLC. And Zoe is kind of... Zoe's interesting. Oh, I don't want to spoil too much going on with Zoe, because there is a DLC about that explains a lot of it. So I won't really touch on her, but she's different to them. We'll say that. She's very different to the rest of her family in the current situation. But yeah, basically the story is Ethan has to find a way to escape the house and save his wife. That's its simplest terms. I don't want to spoil anything else. I'm sure most of you have played it, so you can kind of get the idea of what I'm saying in its simplest terms, and you know the story by now. So, yeah, that's the simple explanation of the story. Now, my overall thoughts on Resident Evil 7, I absolutely adore this game. I think it's honestly one of the best in the series, and probably one of my favourite games ever. Village was very, very close to taking over this, but it's just the elements that are in RE7, like the limited inventory and the item box and stuff like that. I prefer that style of Resident Evil to the kind of attach case system, but Village is still very, very good. Honestly, my top kind of Resident Evil games are RE7, RE1, Resident Evil 2, and, you know, Village. 5 is also in there, but that's a completely separate idea, completely separate game in terms of gameplay, but I still really, really like 5. But yeah, actual Resident Evil games. 1, 2, 7, and 8 are definitely my favourites. But there you go, Resident Evil 7. Let me know your thoughts on Resident Evil 7. Happy birthday to Resident Evil 7. I can't believe it's been 5 years already, and Village is so close to being a year old, and that's just insane. But yeah, thank you all for coming by and listening to me ramble about a pretty great game. Again, if you haven't played this game, definitely check it out. Remember to leave a like on the video, comment your thoughts on RE7, and I'll see you all tomorrow for a brand new video.